Hi, this is Dr. B, and I wanted to record a quick video with some tips on how I might search and choose sources for a research project. Searching for sources is sometimes a really time-consuming process, and it can be really frustrating. But the general rule is you don't want to just, if you need, 10 sources for a project, you don't want to just pick the first 10 that you find. And even if you found 10 citations, that doesn't always mean that you can find those sources right away. So looking for sources really should occur earlier in a project cycle because it can be time consuming and frustrating. And I just wanted to show you a few tips if you're maybe out of practice looking for sources, especially, when you're able to narrow down a topic on your own like you are for this project. It can be a little overwhelming. Where do I find sources and what do I choose? So I hope this will help. Okay, so in general, there are a lot of places to find sources, but these are the places where I usually go. You have access to a lot of sources through the WSU libraries. They have a really great collection of journals, but sometimes I find it difficult to search, starting there with a search, but I'll show you a few things. Also, contact the librarians at WSU. I know a lot of librarians who really love helping people with their projects, and they're an underutilized resource. But if you're going to, work with a librarian, and they're wonderful, they will really be very helpful, but you need to start that earlier. You don't want to contact a librarian the day before a project is due, but I'll show you a few tips there. Google Scholar is a really great resource. This is usually where I initially look for things. And just to get like a citation, and then I'll go to WSU libraries to find the journal. If you start reading in your field, you can develop a list of journals. I have a spreadsheet that as I read sources, I tend to notice the journals that they're coming from. And I have collected up a list of journals that I like in my field where I've noticed I've read a lot of things from those journals, and I tend to find a lot of things in those journals very useful. So there can be a lot of journals in a field, any kind of particular field, but each journal will kind of have its own scope and focus, and you might find yourself drawn to particular journals in your field. So creating a list of journals that you come back to time and time again is helpful. You can also look on publisher websites. If you know the publisher, I'll show you that. It's not as common, but it can be helpful, especially if you're looking for something that's not traditionally in the field that you're used to. So if you're in English but looking for a science article, it might be a way to find something. And then Works Cited. When I first started reading published papers, I skipped over the in-text citations because it was kind of interrupting my reading. But as I started paying attention to those citations, I realized there were certain authors or certain papers that were cited within the paper I was reading that I was really interested in those ideas. And so I now flip to the back of the Works Cited and I make notes of the sources I'm interested in as they're being cited, and I can go look for those later. If you find a couple of papers that are really focused on what you're looking for, then their Works Cited can really be a gold mine. Okay, so let's take a look at these really, really quickly and how I might go about searching. So here is the WSU Library's homepage. And when if you want to search, the easiest thing to do obviously is to go in the search bar, and you can search for articles, books, and more. And there are a lot of materials that are available online. We have online access, but this can be a pretty broad way to start your search, and it just depends on where you're at. This might not be the best way to start, but let's say I'm really interested. You could just put social justice, and science or publishing, just put in some keywords. Keywords are really how we find what we're looking for to help locate resources. And so if the abstract of the journal that you're looking for has these keywords, or if the journal authors entered in these keywords, then you'll be able to find some good sources. The problem is sometimes we are not using the right keywords. So it really does depend on how that journal itself has listed the keywords. Sometimes we have to try a few different combinations to really find what we're looking for. But if you just put in these keywords, sorry, my internet's a little slow today. It should come up probably with a whole lot of stuff, right? If you look here, we have 172,513 results. I'm not going through all those. No one has time for that. But so it's a lot. There are books, and you can narrow this down to like peer-reviewed journals. You can narrow it down to articles. If you, excuse me, book chapters are fine, but sometimes if we're doing a small literature review, we might want to keep it narrowed down. But as you look, to articles, especially if you don't have, if the books may not be, online. So book chapters are good. You can skim through reviews. Sometimes reviews can be helpful for you to understand if a book or a book chapter would be helpful. Sometimes like the title of a book chapter sounds good, but by the time we locate that chapter and read it, we realize it's not quite what we're looking for. So sometimes reviews can help. I usually narrow it down to articles and peer-reviewed journals, but as you can see, that's still a lot. So a lot has been written on this, which is great. If I were to continue to search this way, I would end up plugging in a lot more keywords and just really trying to figure out the best combination of words for what I'm looking for. So, this is, there are a lot of other ways that you can search. You can look for a specific journal. You can look through their databases. There are other ways for you to search for your sources, and you can narrow it down by the category. So if you wanted to look for ethics and social justice in scientific fields, then you would choose, maybe the physical sciences here. But you my tip is you'll probably be looking for something more either in the social sciences, journalism and communications, or usually the rhetoric of science or technical communication focusing on science publishes more in things like social sciences, journalism and communications, and sometimes language and literature. But there might be some things written, and published by in the hard sciences as well. So that's another way to do it. But you're casting a wide net, and this is going to take some time. So you need to develop your particular way of doing it. And the way that I like to do it is I use Google Scholar. So I go to Google, it's scholar.google.com. If I'm on campus, which I'm not today, it's really helpful because it will tell me what's on campus and what's available. But let's say I just want to know like ethics, or social justice. I can put in like anti-racism, science, and publishing. I'm putting in a ton of stuff here just to see what would happen. And it comes up with a ton of results. But if you see over here, one thing I like is that some of these PDFs and things are available. So I can just kind of, skim them. But let's say here, historical scientific racism and psychiatric publications, a necessary international anti-racist code of ethics. That's interesting, but I'm not sure if that's something I, want to necessarily look at. Women, social justice scholars, risks and rewards of committing to anti-racism. That sounds interesting. Structural racism in scientific journals, a teachable moment. Now this, just for me, I'm like, hey, that seems more specific to what I'm looking for. So I can look at this in a new tab and see where it's published, right? The JAMA network. And I should be able to get a citation here. Even allow me to, download it. Some things are still open source. I think, a lot of things opened up during the pandemic, but I can read this abstract, I can read the paper. This one looks open source. This is great. And if I find that this is something I'm really interested in, then one of my other tips is go to their works cited. So I can, as I'm reading, I might find some other sources here in the works cited. So as I'm reading this, I want to be on the lookout for keywords. So if this had an abstract in front of it, that would be more helpful. But let's see. Structural racism may influence multiple facets of the publishing arena, including the composition of journal leadership, editorial boards, and peer review process, published content, and more. this is looking really good. So maybe I might structural racism and publishing might be another way of narrowing down my search. So structural racism, publishing, and I could put science and see if other things come up. It's a little bit more narrow. No, it's a little broader. What? Anyway, and then here's to dismantle structural racism in science. Scientists need to learn how it works. So this, for me, I don't know why, but I've always found Google Scholar to be at least easier for figuring out what combination of terms is going to help me find what I'm looking for. And even if, let's say I found an article that wasn't open source, I can then look up that journal with WSU, right? So let's say, let's pick one here. I don't know. I'm just going to pick one. I'm trying to find one where I don't have access to the article so I can show you. Okay, so it took me a bit, but I found something and maybe I'd want to read this, and I can find the abstract online, but maybe I don't have access to the actual journal. If I were on WSU's campus, it would be easy to kind of sign in, but if I'm not, then sometimes we'll have like a sign in your institution button up here. I can just look up this journal way back, and we could either search for the article name, okay, like this. So Control C and Control V. Oh, it might come up this way again. So here we go, right? And you can download the PDF or get it for me. Sometimes you might have to, if you really want an article and they don't have it available online, you can use interlibrary loan to get the article. But if they have access to it, then you'll be able to get the PDF. You can also look it up if you're doing an e-journal search. We can go find what journal this is in. Sorry, I'm missing it, which is Genetics in Medicine, and that's another way that you could search for it and find it that way. So just a quick little, kind of tips. If you have trouble finding a source, you can reach out. I see if there's a way that I can help you, but the librarians are very, very, very knowledgeable and very helpful, and they love helping people. And I think they sometimes get upset that we don't make enough use of them. So, but I would start with Google Scholar. This helps me to kind of figure out the search terms I want to use. And if you find an abstract that you're interested in, sometimes they'll list keywords near the abstract. But just skimming through here, when people write abstracts, they stuff them full of keywords. So look for keywords in the abstract of an article that hits on what you're really looking for, and kind of mining them for keywords can help you make sure you're plugging in the right keywords in your search term. Okay. Okay, when searching for sources, you'll want to try different combinations of keywords and phrases. Like I just showed you, sometimes you might find one or two sources with one combination, and sometimes you may not. Sometimes you may find way too many sources, and sometimes you're not going to find enough. But sometimes I'll break it up and even have, 2 or 3 different searches. I might have, if I'm looking for, in general, maybe I want some general information on social justice, I might write social justice, writing, or social justice, or anti-racism, and then look for sources within maybe the last 3 years just to get the most contemporary information. Then I might do another search on maybe anti-racism or anti-discrimination in academic publishing in general. And then a third search term, then I might do more specifically sciences. So if you don't find exactly what you're looking for with your first search combination, you might want to jot down, break up your topic into subtopics and then search on those topics. And then you would find maybe one source on social justice in general to kind of give you a good idea. And then maybe there's a source on anti-racism and scholarly publishing in academia in general. And maybe you found one specifically in the field of medicine. Then together, those 3 sources can help you cover your topic. So don't get discouraged if you find either too many or not enough. breaking it down into different topics, trying a combination of different words, mining your abstracts for keywords. These things can help you start narrowing in on, specific sources. And then I usually, if I know that I need 10 sources, I'll probably choose 5 or 6 to read, and then I will actually use their works cited to help me find more, because it's kind of like, I got this advice once on dating, which is, if you date a friend of a friend, you're more likely to like that person because you like your friends, right? You've already sort of chosen them. So if your friend likes someone else, the chances of you liking them are really good. So it's kind of like letting your friends sort of filter out, who you want to date. And so I think of sources that way. I really like this one source. I really enjoyed their take on this. Well, I'm pretty likely then to like their sources. So you can use that as kind of a guideline. But remember too that information is important, but don't just focus on the information itself. Sometimes we might find a source that we really like, but our audience might not find credible. So this is why Wikipedia is such a problem for people, right? You might find a lot of really great information in a Wikipedia article, and it may be, credible information, but if you're trying to publish in an academic article, you might be able to use Wikipedia as an artifact for analysis, but they're not really going to trust it as a source of information. So think about, what your audience is going to find credible. Okay, in terms of evaluating sources then, once you find a bunch of sources, I've already mentioned this in a couple of other videos, but just as a quick recap, here's some reasons why you might want to use a source. Evaluating a source means, what is the information in here? Is it useful to me? Should I use this source? You might use it because of the information in it. Maybe there's a good example or a specific detail you'd like to use. Maybe you're just using it for background information for yourself or your reader. Maybe it's a very credible source. Maybe this person is an expert in this topic and they would be good to incorporate. They can help you to determine significance and impact. Scope is a really big issue, especially in a small research project like a research letter. You want to limit your scope, meaning how wide you're casting your net. So a source can help you narrow your scope when you're using secondary sources. Maybe you want to use it as support for your argument. Maybe it's just a gold mine of information and there's a ton of sources in there that you'd like to try to look up. Maybe they have a similar methodology and you'd like to try to use that methodology for your research project. And then I have a handout on Canvas for more information. If we go to Canvas, the research page for research letters, I've written this short guide. I wrote this a long time ago to help graduate students when I was writing a dissertation boot camp. And it basically just goes over the basics of abstracts, annotations, and evaluating sources. These are just really useful research skills. And I give you an example of a couple of different ways that you can evaluate sources. Sometimes, I've had people tell me they think this is too much work, like, making a grid like this and actually filling it out for their sources seems like too much work. But writing is 90% planning and 10% doing. One of the things that makes writing so difficult is that when you're sitting down to write, you realize you don't have the information that you need, or you don't have the source that you need. And that's because we didn't plan enough. So if we sit down and actually take the time to do this kind of work, really spend our time searching for sources, building out our grid of what we're actually looking for in a source, and actually going through and checking that off and evaluating the source, and then writing an annotation of that source, it's going to make the writing process so much easier and so much more efficient. And trust me, I know that it seems like a lot of work, but it makes your life much easier later. Okay. Give your sources a job. I mentioned this in the handout, but rather than just, oh, this has great information, how should I use this? Try to think specifically what this source is going to do for you. This is especially valuable after you've read it and perhaps before you write an annotation or some notes. Sometimes people will just stick like a random quote inside of their paper because they're like, this article had great information, but I'm not sure how to use it. So they don't integrate it as effectively into their writing. If like, for example, this source is going to help me support my argument, or this source is going to help me show that this is relevant to the reader, then you know exactly where you're going to integrate it. You can choose, the best way to integrate it. Is it going to be paraphrase, quote, or summary? And then you know exactly what part of that paper you need to make note of. And it just makes using this source and writing a lot more of a streamlined process. Again, I recommend that you read and annotate. This is why we should start early searching for sources, not only because it can be time consuming to find good sources, but we want to read and annotate before we use a source. And you're going to read the best practices. You're going to read it at least 3 times. This seems like a lot of work, but research is work, and doing this work beforehand is going to make the writing process a lot easier. One of the things that's so time consuming is if we don't have a clear idea of how we're going to use a source, we find ourselves flipping back and forth in that source over and over and over again. So we sit down to write a paragraph, and then before we know it, we've wasted an hour flipping around for sources looking for something. And we might accidentally plagiarize because we may not realize that an idea that's popped into our head is actually something from our reading. So it seems like a lot more work, but it saves us time and energy and helps us from plagiarizing if we actually annotate, which means we take note of the information that's in the article that we want to use. And create our own small annotated bibliography. If we're detailed enough with our annotations, and actually what I do is write down the quotes I want to use, or I'll create a summary that I want to use, and I go ahead and write the citation in my annotated bibliography. I always know where that information came from. So when I'm writing, I can just use the notes from my annotated bibliography. That's going to save me a lot of time. I don't have to go flipping back and forth through these sources over and over and over again. So again, check out my handout for tips on writing annotations. And as I've mentioned in a previous video, in the use of secondary research, there are a lot of purposes why, or reasons why you might want to use secondary sources in your research letter. So keep these purposes in mind, whatever, as you're searching for sources. If you're like, if you find a source you think is interesting, but you can't imagine a role for it in this project, then write that citation down and maybe go read it later. Maybe it's just something you're interested in. That doesn't mean you have to pick it for this project. As you're skimming through looking for sources, ask yourself, what am I specifically going to do with this source? Can I use it to, provide a survey or background information? Does this help me establish the need for this work? Does this help me discuss what's come before? Does this help me with my methodology or analysis? Does this help me discuss my results? Etc. If you can't think of a purpose, then, like I said, come back to it later. And that's it. I know that was a quick tour of how I might find sources, and probably wasn't very thorough, but if you need help, you can hit me up on the discussion forums, you can email me, and of course you can contact a librarian, but I am available to help you if you need any help. So thank you.